Thank you very much, everyone. So again, my name is James Davis. I'm a political officer here at the U.S. Consulate General in Erbil. And hopefully I'm going to teach you a little something about the Electoral College, which is how we elect the President and Vice President of the United States. So as I'm sure you all know, our next presidential election is happening this November in a little less than 70 days. And that won't be the only office on the ballot. There will be 435 seats of the U.S. House of Representatives, 30 of 100 seats in the U.S. Senate, and then thousands of seats in state houses and local government. So let's just begin by watching a brief video that explains the Electoral College, and then I'll continue my presentation from there. Yeah.
5 representatives plus 100 senators and 3 electors from the District of Columbia. Essentially, the Democratic candidate and Republican candidate are each trying to add up the electors in every state so that they surpass 270 electoral votes, or just over half of 538 votes, and win the presidency. So how do states even get electoral votes? Each state receives a particular number of electors based on population size. The census votes. Let's say you're a voter in California, a state with 55 electoral votes. If your candidate wins in California, they get all 55 of the state's electoral votes. If your candidate loses, they get none. This is why many presidential candidates want to win states like Texas, Florida, and New York. If you currently add up the electoral votes of those 3 states, you would have 96 electoral votes. Even if a candidate won North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, Vermont, New Hampshire, Connecticut, and West Virginia, they would only gain 31 electoral votes total from those 8 states. Here's where it can get a little tricky. On a rare occasion, like in the year 2000, someone can win the popular vote but fail to gain 270 electoral votes. This means that the winner may have won and collected their electoral votes by small margins, winning just enough states with just enough electoral votes, but the losing candidate may have captured large voter margins in the remaining states. If this is the case, the very large margins secured by the losing candidate in the other state would add up to over 50% of the ballots cast nationally. Therefore, the losing candidate may have gained more of the electoral votes. Some critics of the Electoral College argue the system gives an unfair advantage to states with large numbers of electoral votes. Think of it this way. It's possible for a candidate to not get a single person's vote, not one vote, in 39 states or the District of Columbia, yet be elected president by winning the popular vote in just 11 of these 12 states: California, New York, Texas, Florida, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Ohio, Michigan, New Jersey, North Carolina, Georgia, or Virginia. This is why both parties pay attention to these states. However, others argue that the Electoral College protects, such as Rhode Island, Vermont, and New Hampshire, and even geographically large states with small populations, like Alaska, Wyoming, and the Dakotas. That's because a candidate can't completely ignore small states, because in a close election, every electoral vote counts. There are certain states that have a long history of voting for a particular party. These are known as safe states. For the past 4 election cycles, in 1996, 2000, 2004, and 2008, Democrats could count on states like Oregon, Maryland, Michigan, and Massachusetts, whereas the Republicans could count on states like Mississippi, Alabama, Kansas, and Idaho. States that are teetering between parties are called swing states. In the past 4 election cycles, Ohio and Florida have been swing states, twice providing electoral votes for a Democratic candidate and twice providing electoral votes for a Republican candidate. Think about it. Do you live in a safe state? If so, is it a Democratic or Republican safe state? Do you live in a swing state? Are your neighbors in your safe? Is the population in your state increasing or decreasing? And do not forget, when you're watching the electoral returns on election night every 4 years and the big map of the United States on the screen, know that the magic number is 270 and start adding.
Okay, and I apologize that some of that was muted. This is my first time doing this, so technical difficulties, but I'm going to repeat some of that information. So in 2016, the last time that we had a presidential election, almost 140 million Americans voted for president, and even more expected to vote this time. But of course, as the video just explained, they're not voting directly for the president. They are voting for electors who will then vote for who the president will be. All right, so here we have a map of the United States with a bunch of numbers on each state. So what this map is showing is the number of electors at each, and you get that number by adding up the number of representatives the state has in the House of Representatives plus 2 senators. And also there's Washington, D.C., where I'm from, which is not a state, but gets 3 representatives, which is the least that any state gets, because the least that you can have is 1 representative in the House of Representatives plus 2 senators, so that's 3. So if you look around the map, you see the biggest number is 55, because California has the most members of the House of Representatives, 53, plus 2 senators, so they get 55 electoral votes. And then let's look around the map at some of the other states that have a lot of votes. So Texas has 38, that's the 2nd highest number. And then Florida and New York both have 29. So those are both states with a lot of people in them, as you can see. And then you've got Pennsylvania, Ohio, Illinois, Michigan. Those are a fair amount of people. But then you look around and you see like these 3 numbers and 4s, so 3s and 4s, so lots of 3s and 4s over here, like Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Idaho. So these are states that don't have a lot of people in them, so they get less votes in the Electoral College. All right, so as the video said, you need 270 votes to win. So there's a total of 538 votes in the Electoral College. So you need half of that plus 1 to win, which is currently 270. So electors meet in November after the election. Actually, no, they meet December 17th this year. State capitals, or in the case of Washington, D.C., they just meet somewhere in D.C. and they vote. And then they mail those votes to Congress. And in January, the president of the Senate, who is the vice president, will tabulate those votes in front of like a joint session of Congress, and will announce who was elected president and vice president. And typically, most states have laws that make their electors vote a certain way. Now, in the past, there have been what we call faithless electors who said that they were going to vote for one candidate, but they decided to vote for someone else or not at all. And actually, the U.S. Supreme Court recently decided that states can make laws to punish people who do not vote how they said they would. So what we have in the Electoral College is a 51% of the vote in California, and the opponent won 49, so 100% of the vote. So this is the case in all states except for two. So those states are Maine here in the Northeast, and then Nebraska here in the Midwest. And so what these states decided to do is they allocate their electoral vote proportionately. So Maine, for example, has two congressional districts, two House of Representatives districts. So they give 2 votes to the person who wins the overall vote in the state, and then each congressional district essentially gets its own vote. So the state could still end up getting 1 vote out of Maine, which is actually what happened for the first time in 2016 with Donald Trump. So Hillary Clinton won the vote in the state overall. She won 1 of the congressional districts, but Donald Trump won the other one. So he got 1 of Maine's 3 electoral votes. And then the same thing in Nebraska happened in 2008 with Barack Obama. So there are 3 congressional districts in Nebraska. So the winner of the state overall gets 2, and then the winner of each individual congressional district then gets a vote. So John McCain won the state of Nebraska overall. He won 2 of its congressional districts, but Barack Obama won the 3rd one. So Barack Obama got his 5 congressional districts. So let's look at how this works out in practice. So what we have here is the results of the 2000 Electoral College. And some of you may remember that this was a pretty contentious, very, very close election. So let's look down here at the popular vote. We see that Al Gore, who was then the outgoing vice president, candidate, 1 million votes, and then George Bush won 50,000,000 votes. So Gore won about 500,000 more votes nationally than Bush did. So a very, very close election. But then we look up here at the electoral votes. So George Bush ended up winning narrowly 271 to 266, and 1 abstained. So this didn't change the results of the election. This was actually an elector in DC who decided that she didn't want to vote, protesting DC's lack of voting rights in Congress. And essentially what this boiled down to was a fight over recounting ballots in the state of Florida, which you can see had a lot of electoral votes, 25 then. And the Supreme Court jumped in and stopped the recount there. And George Bush narrowly won the state by, I think it was less than 400 votes. I want to say it was 327, but a very, very narrow margin in the state of Florida gave George Bush the presidency in 2000. And it's also interesting, you can see how close this is. So for example, Al Gore lost the state of New Hampshire here that you see in red. Oh, and sorry, I didn't explain the colors. So in the United States, typically blue is the color associated with the Democratic Party, and red is the color associated with the Republican Party. So all of these states in red are states that George Bush won, or that a Republican won, and then the states in blue are states that voted for the Democrat. So you'll often hear people in the United States refer to red states and blue states. So that means Republican-leaning states and Democratic-leaning states. And then there are also purple states. Those are swing states, states that can go either way in an election, which is what they spoke about a little bit in the video. So again, if you look here at New Hampshire, with its 4 electoral votes, so had New Hampshire voted for Al Gore, that would have given him 270 votes. Actually, no, that would have given him 271 votes, and Bush 200 66, assuming this person he voted. But yeah, just that margin there affected the race. And so here is actually our most recent electoral college. This is the 2016 presidential election between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. So again, looking at the popular vote, we see that Clinton got almost 69 million votes. Trump got almost 63,000 votes, but President Trump won the vast majority of votes in the Electoral College. You see he got 307 votes to 227 for Clinton. And so how did this happen? So you might remember from the video, one of the states that they mentioned as swing states was Michigan. And so Hillary Clinton lost very, very narrowly, like by a percentage point or maybe a few percentage point in 3 key states. So we have Pennsylvania here with 20 votes, Michigan with 16, and Wisconsin with 10. And so between them, that is 46 votes. And so that 46 votes right here determined the margin of the election. So, and also you see these other colors here. You might be wondering what these are, these little circles. So yeah, so this one right here is the one electoral vote I was saying that Donald Trump got in Maine because he won one of the House districts there. But these other 7 numbers are what I was referring to earlier, faithless electors. So these are people who promised to vote for either Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton and did not vote for either one of them. And so this page shows you the 2012 Electoral College results. So this is, I guess, more of a normal year, where everyone voted for who they said they would vote for. And also the winner of the popular vote, you see the Electoral College. So of course we have a 2-party system in the United States. We have the Republicans, who are typically center-right to more on the right of the political spectrum. We have the Democrats, who are center-left to more on the left of the political spectrum. This is not in the Constitution, but there are those who argue that the Electoral College and our political system have kind of evolved to favor 2 strong factions competing against one another, as opposed to some parliamentary democracies where you can have coalitions of a lot of small parties. So since we have these 2 parties that are very, very strong, and there's either been a Republican or a Democratic president for over 150 years, there are those who say that voting for a third party is a waste, where they say that people, that third party candidates are spoilers. So an example of this would be the 1992 Electoral College, where we Bill Clinton running, George H.W. Bush, President George W. Bush's father, who was running for re-election, and then a very strong third-party challenger, Ross Perot, who was a billionaire Texas businessman, ran for president. And he had a lot of money to fund his own race, which was not very common at the time. He had a message that resonated a lot with voters who were disillusioned with President Bush. The economy wasn't doing very well then. So if we look at the popular vote here, he actually got a higher percentage of the popular vote than third-party challengers gotten. Yeah, I mean, no third-party challenger has come that close ever since. They're typically lucky if they get over 1% nationally, but we see that Ross Perot got 18.9% of the vote. And so that drove down support, you can see, for George Bush as well as Bill Clinton. So Bill Clinton only got 43% of the popular vote to George Bush's 37%, but you can see that in terms of the Electoral College, Ross Perot's effect on the race really helped Bill Clinton clean up in terms of electoral votes. So he won 370 electoral votes to George Bush's 168. And you see Ross Perot did not carry a single state, even though he came in second in some. So he did not get any electoral votes despite his relatively strong showing there. So how many votes each state gets? So it's a process called apportionment that happens after every census. So in the United States, we have a census every 10 years. This is actually a census year. So they should, the Census Bureau should be finishing up the counting in the next couple of months. And basically the clerk of the House of Representatives tells each state how many votes they will have in the House of Representatives for the following session of Congress. And then the states redistrict, at least in terms of the boundaries of the districts in their state, but the number of seats is set by the clerk of the House of Representatives. So what we see here is that there are seats, and of course some states just remain the same. So what we have right here is a projection of what we should the 2020 census, and that won't affect the votes for this race, but it will affect the results for 2024. So what we see here, these states that are in orange, we see Rhode Island, New York, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Michigan, Illinois, Minnesota are all expected to lose seats. And then we have North Carolina, Florida, Texas, Arizona, Colorado, Oregon that are all expected to gain seats. Texas is expected to gain the most with 2 seats. The others are expected to gain 1 each. And then we see the states that are losing seats lose 1 each. And it's interesting for Rhode Island because they only have 2 members of the House of Representatives. So that means that they're now just going to have 1. So we'll see if someone decides to retire or if they both end up running against each other. But yeah, so we see, and this is just something that we've seen in the US for decades, this kind of move of population from the North and the Midwest, these former industrial areas, to the South and the West. And so in case of a tie, or if someone does not get 270 votes in the Electoral College, the 12th Amendment says that basically the House of Representatives votes for the president. So each state gets 1 vote. So that means that there are 50 votes, and so that would be a Democrat or Republican, and I guess, whatever independent or third party person is running that year. And each state gets a vote, 1 vote, no matter how many people live in that state or how few. And that's how they keep voting basically until one person gets a majority of the ballot. So we're going to go back here. It's interesting because let's see what's a good example. Okay, yeah. So 2012, you see that there are a lot more these red states, so states that typically vote for the Republican candidate as opposed to a blue state or states that vote for Democrats. So at this point, if the House had to decide, this would actually probably benefit the Republican Party. But there's no at this point because the House of Representatives hasn't had to choose someone like that since I think 1800, so it's been a while. And also you can just see how, I guess, disproportionate that is. So here is California. California has a little less than 40 million people. So California gets 1 vote as a state. And then here is Wyoming, the state with the least amount of people. It has about 600,000, and they get 1 vote. So you can see that this proposal favors smaller states. All right, so let's see. So before I get to questions, just a couple of other things. So Americans who live overseas can vote in the United States if they have one. What if you're an American who's never lived in the US, like your parents were American and so you have US citizenship? You can vote where they lived last in the United States. But there are some Americans who do not get to vote for president. These include US citizens who live in territories, so like Puerto Rico, the US Virgin Islands, Guam, they do not get to vote for president. But if they move to the United States and become a resident of a state, then they can vote for president. So yeah, I guess those are the basics of the my presentation.